The fluorescent lights of Westbrook Elementary hummed softly overhead, casting their sterile glow across the linoleum floors as parents shuffled through the main corridor in a slow, uncertain parade. The walls were decorated with construction paper turkeys and hand-traced autumn leaves, the kind of cheerful chaos that only an elementary school could produce. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with the faint sweetness of tempera paint hung in the air, and somewhere down the hall, a janitor pushed a mop bucket that squeaked with every rotation of its wheels. Roger Graham stood near the entrance of classroom 4B, his broad shoulders slightly hunched as if he were trying to make himself smaller, less conspicuous among the clusters of mothers in cardigans and fathers checking their phones. He wore his cleanest flannel shirt, the navy one with the subtle plaid pattern, tucked into work jeans that still carried the faint ghost of sawdust no matter how many times he washed them. His hands, rough and calloused from years of carpentry work, fidgeted with a folded piece of paper, his daughter's latest spelling test, the one with the gold star and the smiley face that he had tucked into his shirt pocket that morning like a talisman. He was 34 years old, but tonight he felt like a teenager again, out of place and overly aware of every creak his boots made against the floor. Single parenthood had taught him many things: how to braid hair without pulling, how to make macaroni and cheese from scratch because his daughter had declared the box kind too orange, how to sit through animated movies without falling asleep. But it had not taught him how to navigate rooms full of couples, how to answer the inevitable questions about where her mother was, how to explain that some people just leave and there is no good reason, only absence. His daughter Emma was somewhere in the gymnasium with the other children, supervised by parent volunteers while the teachers conducted their conferences. She was 7 years old, all wild curls and missing teeth and boundless energy that left him exhausted and grateful in equal measure. She was also the only reason he had showed up tonight, because she had looked at him with those big brown eyes and said, "Daddy, you have to meet Miss Linda. She's the best teacher in the whole world. She makes me feel like I'm good at stuff." And Roger, who had walked through fire for that little girl, had put on his cleanest shirt and driven across town. The line for Miss Linda's classroom moved slowly. Parents emerged looking either reassured or concerned, clutching folders of student work and progress reports. Roger watched them come and go, trying to gauge what kind of teacher this Miss Linda was. Emma had talked about her constantly since the school year began. Miss Linda said, "I have beautiful handwriting." Miss Linda taught us a song about the water cycle. Miss Linda always smiles at me in the morning like she's really happy to see me. It was that last detail that had caught in his chest, the idea of someone being genuinely happy to see his daughter, of someone making her feel wanted. He checked his watch, 7:42. His appointment was at 7:45. The couple ahead of him, a well-dressed pair who looked like they had stepped out of a catalog, finally emerged from the classroom. Roger stepped forward, took a breath, and pushed open the door. The classroom was warm and inviting, nothing like the cold institutional spaces he remembered from his own school days. Bookshelves lined the walls, overflowing with colorful spines and stuffed animals that served as reading buddies. Student artwork hung from strings crisscrossing the ceiling, paper butterflies and watercolor landscapes swaying gently in the draft from the heating vent. A small lamp on the teacher's desk cast a softer glow than the overhead lights, which had been dimmed to something almost cozy. And there, seated behind a desk covered in student folders and a small vase of wildflowers, was a woman who made Roger's heart stop beating entirely. She was looking down at a paper, her honey-brown hair falling in soft waves around her face, reading glasses perched on her nose. She wore a cream-colored sweater that looked impossibly soft, and there was a small silver necklace resting against her collarbone, a delicate thing that caught the light when she moved. She had not looked up yet, had not seen him standing frozen in the doorway like a man who had just seen a ghost. Because that was exactly what this felt like, seeing a ghost. "You must be Emma's father," she said, still looking at the paper. "Please, have a seat. I'll be with you in just one moment." Her voice, that voice. It was older now, fuller somehow, but it was the same voice that had once whispered secrets to him under bleachers and laughed at his terrible jokes and told him she loved him on a summer night that smelled like jasmine and possibility. Roger's throat constricted. His feet remained rooted to the floor. She looked up. The reading glasses made her eyes look larger, those green eyes he had spent years trying to forget, the color of sea glass and morning light and every good thing he had ever lost. Recognition flickered across her face like a flame catching dry kindling. Her lips parted. The paper in her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Roger? The name came out as barely more than a whisper, a sound caught somewhere between disbelief and something raw, something that had no business existing in a third-grade classroom on a Tuesday evening. Roger swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally emerged, was rough around the edges. Linda? They stared at each other across the small distance of the classroom, across the larger distance of 15 years, across all the words that had never been said, and all the ones that had been said too late. Linda Green. The girl who had grown up next door to him in a small town 300 miles from here. The girl who had climbed through his bedroom window when they were 16 because she had heard him crying after his father's funeral. The girl who had held his hand and told him he was going to be okay, and for a while he had believed her. The girl who had left for college with promises to write, to call, to come back, and then had slowly, gradually, inevitably faded away like morning mist, until one day Roger realized he had not heard her voice in over a year and the silence had become permanent. Emma's father, Linda said slowly, as if the words were pieces of a puzzle she was still assembling. You're Emma Graham's father. I am. Linda removed her glasses carefully, set them on the desk, and pressed her fingers to her temples. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright, too bright, the kind of brightness that comes before tears. She has your eyes, she said softly. I noticed it the first day of school, thought maybe I was imagining things. But she has your eyes, Roger. That same honey brown. Roger felt something crack open in his chest. He moved forward mechanically, lowered himself into the small chair across from her desk, the kind of chair designed for 7-year-olds that made him feel over-large and awkward. Small world, he managed. Linda let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Small world doesn't begin to cover it. A silence stretched between them, thick with history. Roger could hear the clock on the wall ticking, could hear muffled voices from the hallway, could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had imagined this moment before, in the abstract way people imagine impossible things. Running into Linda somewhere someday, being older and wiser and completely over whatever they had been to each other. In his imagination, he was always composed, casual, maybe even indifferent. In reality, his hands were shaking and he could not look away from her face. Your daughter, Linda said, her voice steadying into something more professional, is one of the brightest students I have ever taught. She's kind, curious, and she works harder than any child her age should have to. She's my whole world, Roger said simply. Linda's eyes flickered up to meet his, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. She pulled out a sheet of paper from Emma's folder, a drawing done in crayon, and slid it across the desk. Roger looked down. The drawing showed a house with a garden, 2 figures standing in front, a tall one with brown hair and a small one with curly hair, and between them a third figure with yellow hair and a big smile. Underneath, in Emma's careful handwriting, were the words, "My family, me, Daddy, and Miss Linda because she makes Daddy smile in my dreams." Roger's breath caught in his throat. She doesn't remember her mother, he said, his voice thick. She was 2 when Sarah left. Some nights she asks me what it's like to have a mom, and I make things up because I don't know what else to do. A knock at the door shattered the moment. A parent volunteer poked her head in. Miss Green, there's a situation in the gym. Some kids got into the art supplies and there's glitter everywhere. Linda rose from her desk. I'll be right there. She paused, looked at Roger with something like regret. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. Been there. I usually stop by after these events. Maybe we could finish this conversation. It was an invitation wrapped in casualness. Roger nodded. I know the place. Linda smiled then, and it was the smile he remembered, the one that had made him feel like the only person in the world worth smiling at. Then maybe I'll see you there, It was nearly 9 o'clock when Roger pushed open the door to Bean there. The coffee shop was small and warm, exposed brick walls covered in local artwork, mismatched furniture arranged in cozy clusters, the rich smell of fresh roasted coffee hanging in the air. And there, at a table near the window, sat Linda. She had changed into jeans and a soft gray cardigan, cradling a cup between her hands like it was something precious. She looked up when he entered, and even across the room he could see the uncertainty in her expression, the hope she was trying to hide. Roger ordered a black coffee and made his way to her table. He sat down across from her, the small wooden surface between them feeling like both a barrier and a bridge. "You came," Linda said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I." They sat in silence for a moment. Roger took a sip of his coffee, burned his tongue, and set the cup down. "I have questions," he said finally. "A lot of them, but I don't know where to start." Linda nodded slowly. "Then let me start. I owe you that much." She wrapped her hands more tightly around her cup and began. "When I left for college, I was 18 years old and terrified. Not of school, not of being on my own, but of how much I felt for you. It scared me, Roger. The depth of it, the way it made everything else seem small. I thought if I put distance between us, the feeling would fade." She paused, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. "But feelings don't work like that. Every letter I meant to write, I started and couldn't finish because I didn't know how to say I miss you in a way that didn't feel like giving up. And then months became years, and the silence became its own wall, and I convinced myself that you had moved on." Roger's jaw tightened. "I waited, Linda. I waited for 2 years. Every time the phone rang, every time the mail came, I hoped. And then I stopped hoping because it hurt too much." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was young and stupid and afraid, and by the time I realized what I'd thrown away, it felt too late to reach back." She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've regretted it every day since. Not because my life has been bad, but because it could have been different, better, shared." Roger let her words settle into him. The anger he had carried for years began to crack at the edges. He saw her not as the girl who had abandoned him, but as a person who had been just as lost, just as scared. "What about now?" he asked. "You're here. I'm here. What does that mean?" Linda shook her head. "I don't know. When I saw Emma's name on my roster, I told myself it was coincidence. But then I saw her and she had your eyes, and I knew." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I was afraid you'd hate me. Because I thought maybe you didn't want to be found." Roger leaned back in his chair. "I don't hate you. I thought I did for a while. But hate takes energy, and I've spent all my energy on Emma." Linda's hand moved across the table, stopped just short of his. "Tell me about her mother." Roger found himself answering. "Sarah was a mistake I made when I was trying to forget you. We met at a bar, got married too fast, had Emma even faster. She was never cut out for motherhood. She tried for 2 years, and then one morning she left a note that said, 'I can't do this anymore,' and disappeared." He exhaled. "Emma doesn't know any of that. She thinks her mom is an angel who had to go back to heaven." Linda's fingers finally closed the distance, covering his hand with hers. The touch was warm, solid, real. "I'm sorry for leaving, for everything you've had to carry alone." Roger turned his hand over, let his fingers intertwine with hers. It felt like coming home to a place he had never actually left. "I'm tired," he admitted. "Tired of doing everything alone. Tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm barely holding it together." Linda squeezed his hand. "Then let someone help. Let me help." "How? We're two strangers who used to know each other. That's not a foundation." She smiled, sad and hopeful all at once. "Then let's build a new foundation, one conversation at a time. I'm not asking for forever, Roger. I'm asking for a chance." He looked at her, this woman who had been his first love and his deepest wound. "One conversation at a time," he agreed. The next few weeks unfolded slowly, carefully, like the petals of a flower opening towards sunlight it was not sure it could trust. Roger and Linda met at Bean there twice more, then 3 times. Then it became a rhythm neither of them questioned. They talked about everything and nothing, their jobs, their fears, the small daily absurdities that made up adult life. She told him about her years after college, the teaching jobs in other states, the relationships that never quite fit, the eventual return to this town because it felt like the closest thing to home she had left. He told her about building his carpentry business from nothing, about the first crib he ever made for Emma before she was born, about the nights he spent sitting outside her room just listening to her breathe. They did not talk about the past in depth. That conversation lurked at the edges, but neither was ready to open that door fully. For now, it was enough to simply exist in each other's presence to rediscover the people they had become. Emma noticed the change before anyone else. "Daddy?" she said one morning over breakfast, her spoon pausing midway to her mouth. "You've been smiling a lot lately, like a real lot." Roger looked up from his coffee. "Have I?" "Uh-huh. And you were humming yesterday. You never hum." He had not realized he was humming. He thought about it and discovered he felt lighter than he had in years. "Maybe I'm just happy," he said. Emma considered this with 7-year-old gravity. "Is it because of Miss Linda?" Roger nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you get the same face when you talk about her that Tommy Mitchell gets when he talks about chocolate cake. All soft and dreamy." "I do not get soft and dreamy." "You totally do, Daddy." She returned to her cereal. "I think it's nice. Miss Linda is the best, and you're the best, so you should be friends. Maybe even married friends." Roger stared at his daughter. "Let's maybe slow down on the marriage talk, okay?" "Okay, but when you do get married, can I be the flower girl? I want to throw petals everywhere." 2 weeks later, Linda came to their house for dinner. It was Emma's idea, delivered with relentless persistence. Linda arrived at 6 o'clock holding a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package for Emma. She wore a yellow sundress despite the cooling autumn weather, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. "Welcome to the chaos," Roger said, stepping aside to let her in. Linda looked around, taking in the comfortable clutter, the toys scattered across the rug, the drawings taped to every surface, the half-finished wooden rocking chair in the corner that Roger had been working on for months. "It's perfect," she said softly. "It looks like love lives here." Before Roger could respond, Emma came thundering down the stairs with Gregory the turtle clutched in her hands. "Miss Linda, this is Gregory. He's 2 years old and he likes lettuce and he can almost recognize his name." The turtle remained motionless, entirely unimpressed. "He's a little shy," Emma explained, "but he likes you, I can tell." Dinner was macaroni and cheese from scratch and garlic bread that Roger had made using his mother's recipe. They sat at the small kitchen table, the three of them crowded together, and the conversation flowed naturally, as if they had been doing this for years. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Linda her room. Roger cleaned up the kitchen slowly, listening to the muffled sounds of their voices from upstairs, the occasional burst of Emma's laughter. When they came back down, Emma was wearing her pajamas and carrying a book. "Miss Linda said she'd read me a story. Is that okay, Daddy?" Roger looked at Linda, who shrugged with a small smile. "Of course." He watched them settle onto the couch together, Emma curled against Linda's side like she belonged there. Linda's voice took on the cadence of storytelling, and Emma's eyes grew heavy. By the time the story ended, Emma was asleep. Roger carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed. When he came back down, Linda was standing by the window looking out at the darkening sky. "She's wonderful," Linda said without turning around. "She's like a tiny miracle that never stops surprising me." Roger crossed the room, stood beside her. "She asked me if we were going to get married." Linda turned, eyebrows raised. "Did she?" "She wants to be the flower girl. The sparkly dress and petal throwing are non-negotiable." Linda laughed. "She's got big plans for us." "She does." He paused. "But I don't actually know what our plans are, what this is becoming." Linda's laughter faded. "What do you want it to become?" "I want more nights like this. I want to stop pretending we're just old friends. I want to know if this is real, or if I'm setting myself up to lose you again." Linda stepped closer. I'm not going anywhere, not this time. How can I be sure? You can't. You just have to trust. I know I haven't given you reason to trust me, but I'm asking anyway. I want to be part of this life. He kissed her then, soft and tentative. She answered by leaning into him. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder. One day at a time, Roger said. One day at a time, she agreed. But happiness rarely arrives without shadows. The shadow came 3 weeks later. Sarah appeared on Roger's front porch, blonde hair longer than he remembered, eyes carrying the same restless emptiness. Hello, Roger. I'm here to see my daughter. Roger's blood ran cold. He stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. You don't have a daughter. You gave up that right when you walked out. I've changed. I've been in therapy. I want to make amends. Amends? You abandoned a 2-year-old. You left a note like you were canceling a subscription. Sarah's composure cracked. I'll fight you. I'll hire lawyers. You try that, and I will bury you. Every missed birthday, every child support payment you never made, every piece of evidence showing what kind of mother you were. For a long moment they stood there. Then Sarah's shoulders dropped. I just wanted to see her, to know she's okay. She's more than okay. She's happy. She has a father who would die for her and people who actually show up. Sarah nodded slowly. Will you tell her I came? Maybe someday, when she's old enough to understand. Sarah walked back to her car without another word. Roger went inside and sat heavily on the couch, hands shaking. That was how Linda found him an hour later. Roger, what happened? He told her everything. When he finished, Linda pulled him close. She won't take Emma. You've built too much for anyone to tear down. What if she actually fights? Then we fight together. You're not alone anymore. He looked at her. We. You said we. I did. Is that okay? It's more than okay. The crisis came 2 months later, on a cold December evening. Emma had been sick for 2 days, a fever that would not break, and Roger finally took her to the hospital when her temperature spiked dangerously high. Linda met them in the emergency room. The diagnosis was pneumonia, severe enough to require hospitalization but treatable. Emma was admitted, her small body hooked up to monitors and IV lines. Roger sat beside her bed, refusing to move, had not slept in 36 hours. Linda brought him coffee he did not drink, food he did not eat. She sat with him through the long hours, held his hand when the fear became too much. On the second night, when Emma's fever finally broke and the doctor said she was out of danger, Roger collapsed into Linda's arms and wept. He wept for the terror of almost losing his daughter, for the years of carrying everything alone, for the relief of having someone beside him. Linda held him without speaking, her hands steady on his back. When his tears subsided, she cupped his face in her hands. She's going to be okay, Linda whispered. You did everything right. You saved her, Roger. I was so scared. I kept thinking, what if I lose her and I wouldn't survive it, Linda? I wouldn't. But you didn't lose her, and she's not all you have. Not anymore. He looked at her, this woman who had stayed through the terrible days. Marry me, he said. The words came out rough and unplanned. I don't have a ring. I don't have a speech. I just know I don't want to face another day without you officially, permanently, completely mine. Marry me, Linda. Linda's eyes filled with tears. For a terrible moment, Roger thought she would say no. But then she smiled, that radiant smile that reached her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. He kissed her in the hospital hallway, under the harsh fluorescent lights, and none of it mattered because she had said yes. A small voice came from the hospital room behind them. Does this mean I get to be the flower girl now? They turned to find Emma sitting up in bed, pale but grinning, her eyes bright despite the IV in her arm. Roger laughed. You were supposed to be sleeping. I heard the good stuff. So, flower girl, sparkly dress, petals? Linda crossed to the bed, sat on the edge, and took Emma's small hand. Absolutely, the sparkliest dress we can find. Emma's grin widened. I knew it. I even told Gregory, and he did his happy blink. Roger joined them on the other side of the bed, his family gathered close. His family. The word felt different now, fuller. The wedding was small, held in the spring in their backyard. Emma was the flower girl, resplendent in a dress that sparkled like starlight, throwing petals with wild enthusiasm. Gregory the turtle watched from a decorated terrarium, serving as the world's most indifferent ring-bearer. Linda's dress was simple cream-colored silk. She walked down the aisle alone, needing no one to give her away. Roger stood at the altar they had built together from reclaimed wood, unable to stop smiling. When Linda reached him, her hand slipped into his. Hi, she whispered. Hi, he whispered back. They had written their own vows. Roger promised to choose her every day, to build a life worthy of the second chance they had been given. Linda promised to stay, to show up, to never again let fear make her decisions. When the officiant pronounced them married, Emma cheered loudly enough to startle the birds from the trees. As the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, Roger watched his wife dance with their daughter, both laughing so hard they could barely stand. His wife, their daughter. You look happy, Linda's mother said beside him. I am. It surprises me every day. She's different with you, settled, like she finally stopped running. Roger nodded. We both were running. It took us 15 years to figure out that the right person is worth waiting for. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Roger and Linda sat on their porch swing wrapped in a blanket. Remember that first night in the classroom? Linda asked. You looked at me like you'd seen a ghost. I had, the ghost of every dream I'd given up on. And now? Now you're not a ghost anymore. You're real, mine. Linda tilted her face up to his. Yours, completely. He kissed her softly. When they pulled apart, Linda was smiling. Emma asked me today if we were going to have a baby. Roger's heart stuttered. What did you tell her? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a pregnancy test, 2 lines clearly visible. I found out this morning. Roger stared at those 2 lines. We're having a baby. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. We're having a baby. He pulled her close, a wife, a daughter, another child on the way. A family built from imperfect people choosing each other again and again. 1 year after the wedding, on their anniversary, Roger took Linda back to Westbrook Elementary, to the classroom where everything had changed. It was summer, the room empty, chairs stacked on desks, sunlight streaming through windows. They stood in the doorway, hands intertwined. 15 years, Linda said softly. 15 years of missing you, and now look at us. Roger pulled her close. I'd do it all again. Every painful day, every lonely night. It all led here. Here, with a matchmaker daughter, a turtle named Gregory, and a baby who thinks 3 a.m. is perfect for practicing opera. Roger laughed. Wouldn't have it any other way. They left hand in hand, walking into the summer sunshine toward the life they had built from second chances and the stubborn refusal to give up on love. Sometimes the greatest love stories do not begin with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes they begin with a mistake, a pair of eyes meeting across a room full of parents and construction paper turkeys. Sometimes they begin with 3 simple words that change everything. Is that really you? If this story touched your heart, you are not alone. Roger and Linda remind us that love is patient, love is persistent, and sometimes love waits 15 years just to say welcome home.